The 7 wolves of the Alpha King had never once allowed a human hand near them. Guards learned to keep their distance. Lords learned to look away. Even Rorik himself, the most feared ruler in the northern holds, approached them with the caution of a man who understood that some wildness could not be commanded. Then one frozen morning, all 7 were found sleeping, not in the outer grounds, not along the perimeter wall, but curled at the feet of a girl no one at Ironholt had ever thought to name. A girl who scrubbed floors, who carried water, who existed in every official record simply as a category. The wolves had chosen her, and the king had seen it. What happened next would change everything neither of them had allowed themselves to want. But why did the most powerful man in the kingdom suddenly order everyone to stay away from her? Watch until the end and tell me in the comments, did you see it coming? The first wolf came to her the way all important things came to Sina, quietly, without announcement, in the middle of work that belonged to no one and had therefore fallen to her. She was in the lower herb garden behind the kitchen hall, her breath making small clouds in the January dark, her fingers numb inside their worn gloves. The garden was her particular territory in the unofficial way that neglected places become the territory of whoever tends them. No one had assigned her to keep it. No one had assigned her to clear the snow from the dormant lavender beds so the roots did not freeze, or to check the dried herb bundles in the cold room for spoilage, or to replenish the simples chest that the estate's healers drew from without considering who kept it stocked. She had been apprenticed to a healer once, briefly, in the estate she came from. The healer had died. The apprenticeship had not transferred. The knowledge had remained. She was pressing the snow back from a cluster of woody thyme when she felt it. Not movement, not sound, a warmth. The particular dense warmth of something large standing very close to her left side. She turned slowly, the way she had learned to move around large animals. No sharp angles, nothing that read as threat. The wolf was enormous, silver gray and ice pale at the muzzle, its amber eyes level with her face. It stood with the deliberate stillness of an animal that had made a decision and arrived at its conclusion. Sina had seen these wolves from a distance. Everyone at Ironholt Keep had. They were the Alpha King's pack, 7 of them, ranging the outer perimeter of the keep's winter grounds with a ferocity that was not aggression but absolute preference. They wanted nothing from humans and had made this clear since before anyone currently living could remember. 3 stable hands had tried to approach them in the autumn. 2 had retreated at the first low warning. 1 had not retreated quickly enough. She looked at the wolf. The wolf looked at her with the amber calm of a creature that has already made up its mind. She turned back to the thyme. After a moment, the wolf lowered itself onto the frozen earth beside her. Its enormous side pressed warm against her knee through the wool of her skirt, and the heat of it was so sudden and so simple that she sat still for a moment, not working, just receiving the warmth. She worked around it for an hour. By the time she gathered her tools, the wolf's eyes had closed, its breathing slowed to the deep, unhurried rhythm of sleep. She did not wake it. She left it in the garden and went inside, and the warmth of where it had pressed against her knee lasted all the way to the kitchen fire. She did not tell anyone. There was, she reflected, no one to tell. No one at Ironholt who had thought to ask her name in the 4 years she had been part of the household. She had arrived with a group of staff transferred from Lord Brant's dissolved estate to the north, listed in the records as Omega Domestic, lower rotation, which was the administrative language for does whatever needs doing, can be relied upon, will not be noticed doing it. She was Signa. She was 24 years old. She had copper-brown hair she kept braided back, and gray eyes the color of the sky before snow, and a face that one of the older kitchen women had once described, in a moment of accidental kindness, as the kind men only notice after they have looked away and found themselves looking back. No one at Ironholt had looked back. The second wolf came 4 days later, the third 2 days after that, then the 4th and 5th, arriving without pattern, moving through the keep's inner grounds with the unhurried authority of animals that had identified something and saw no reason to explain themselves. They came where she worked. They settled. They slept. And when she moved on, they rose and followed. The keep noticed on the 6th day, when the understeward caught sight of her crossing the inner courtyard through the morning frost with 4 enormous wolves moving at her heels, their broad shoulders level with her waist, their breath fogging the cold air around her like a moving cloud. He stopped. He stared. He stood in the courtyard for a long time after she had gone inside. By the evening bell, the story had traveled through every rotation of the household. By morning, it had reached Lady Ingrid, the keep's estate administrator, precise and competent and utterly committed to the management of rank. Lady Ingrid summoned her before the first work bell. "There are reports," Lady Ingrid said, standing at the tall window with her back to the room in the manner of a woman who has long since stopped needing to face people in order to command them. "About the perimeter wolves." "Yes, my lady." "They have entered the inner grounds. This has not happened in living memory." Signa waited. Lady Ingrid turned. Her assessment was quick and complete, the kind developed by women who have spent decades inside institutional hierarchies. A single sweep that classified and filed. Signa was used to being classified. She was used to the assessment finding nothing and moving on. This time, it paused. Something in Lady Ingrid's cool gray eyes hesitated at Signa's face, then at her hands, still roughened from the garden, still carrying faint traces of lavender under the fingernails. "The king arrives in 12 days, Lady Ingrid said carefully. "Those wolves belong to him. They have not accepted proximity from any person at this keep since his father's reign. Whatever is happening, cease it. Whatever you have done to encourage them, stop." "I have done nothing, my lady. I have not fed them or called them." "Then stay away from the outer grounds." "Yes, my lady." She was dismissed. She stayed away from the outer grounds. The wolves came into the inner grounds instead. He arrived on a gray morning, the kind that the north produced in January like a craft it had perfected. No wind, no drama, just the sky the color of old pewter pressing down on white ground. Signa was in the east storeroom when the sound of the arrival moved through the stone walls of the keep. She heard it the way she heard most things at Ironholt, at a remove, filtered through solid walls and the particular muffled acoustics of a place built to keep the cold out. Horses. Voices carrying. Lady Ingrid's precise tones shaping themselves into welcome. She kept counting. The gray wolf was asleep on her feet. She became aware of someone in the doorway approximately 3 seconds before she looked up. There was a quality to the attention, a weight, a specificity, that was different from the idle curiosity of a kitchen boy looking for something misplaced. She looked up. The man in the doorway was tall. Not simply tall, dense, as if he had been assembled from denser materials than ordinary men, the kind of physical presence that changes the proportions of a room by standing in it. He was perhaps 28, 30 at most, which was younger than Signa had imagined based on the weight of reputation that preceded him. His hair was dark, the brown-black of wet bark in winter, worn to his jaw, still carrying the cold of the road in its texture. His face was sharp in the way of men who have made a great many decisions and had those decisions made about them in return. A jaw that could have been measured with a carpenter's tool, a brow that carried something heavier than its years. His eyes, when they moved from the wolf to her face, were the gray of dark water. Not cold exactly, but deep, unlit from within. The eyes of a man who had learned to keep the lamp behind glass. She had not stood when he entered. She stood now. "Forgive me, my lord, I did not hear you at the door." "I came quietly." His voice was even, not a voice that needed volume. "What is your name?" "Signa, my lord. Omega domestic, lower rotation. I arrived with the household transfer from the Brant estates 4 years ago." He looked at her for a moment in a way she was not familiar with, not the filing assessment she knew, which found nothing and moved on, but something that had found something and was not yet certain what to do with it. Then he looked at the wolf asleep on her feet. The gray wolf, as if aware of the attention, twitched its tail once without waking. "The gray wolf," he said, "has not willingly entered the keep's inner grounds in 3 years. I have been told, my lord. It is sleeping on your feet. Yes. A silence. Something moved in the deep water eyes. Not quite amusement, the echo of what amusement had once sounded like, before it got buried under 22 years of being the fixed point around which everything else turned. Continue your inventory, he said. I will speak with you this evening. He left. She stood very still for a moment after he had gone. Her hand, when she picked up her pen again, was not entirely steady. She wrote the next number in the column and looked at it, and it was wrong, and she crossed it out and wrote it correctly. Outside the storeroom, through the fixed stone walls, she heard his voice, as he moved back toward the keep's main hall, asking questions she could not make out. She heard his name said by one of his riders, in the tone of address used for someone accustomed to being addressed. Rorik. Rorik, Alpha King of the Northern Holds. She went back to counting jars, the library and the old record. He summoned her to the keep library after the supper hour, through a message worded with the careful neutrality of a man who understood that neutrality was its own form of management. The Alpha King will speak with her regarding the household accounts, so that Lady Ingrid would file it in the correct category and not look further. The library was small and warm, in the way of rooms that had been used regularly through the winter. Signa arrived at the door with her work basket over her arm, and her hair still damp at the temples from washing before she came, and she stood for a moment in the doorway, looking at the man sitting at the table before he looked up. He was reading. She had not expected that. The image of him she had been carrying since the storeroom was the one in the doorway, motionless and dense with authority. Reading made him different. It made him look, for a moment, like a man with a particular problem rather than a force of nature. He looked up. He gestured to the chair across the table. She sat. He set a leather volume between them, open to a page whose corner had been turned and returned until the paper had gone soft. He turned it so she could read the entry. She read it. The ink was faded to a pale brown. The handwriting was careful, the handwriting of a record keeper who understood that their work outlasted them. The entry described, in the dry language of administrative records, an occurrence at Ironholt Keep 102 years prior. The estate pack. 7 animals of the Northern Grey bloodline found sleeping in the proximity of a domestic staff member, Omega classification, in the lower quarters and working areas of the keep over a period of 18 days. The behavior was without precedent in the pack's recorded history. She looked up. The wolves here, he said. What it describes. Yes, she said. I can read. A pause, then, forgive me. I did not mean it as a question about your abilities. I know, she said. I was not offended. He leaned forward slightly. The lamp between them lit the left side of his face and left the right in shadow. And in that asymmetry, he looked less like a king and more like a man working through something he had not yet fully understood. This occurred once before, he said, in the history of this pack. To a woman in your position, Omega domestic, lower rotation. He paused. The record does not say what came of it. Records for women in my position rarely do. A silence. I intend to find out, he said. She looked at him across the lamp. You should, she said. He held her gaze. He had the quality of absolute stillness that she had come to understand, over the course of the evening, was not coldness, or was not only coldness, but the particular composure of a man who has learned that the space before a decision is the last place that belongs entirely to him. There is a council review at Carveth in 3 weeks, he said, shifting. 3 council members have been building a procedural case against the keep's operating status for 18 months. Any anomaly here becomes material in that context. He paused. I am telling you this because you are entitled to understand the situation, not to alarm you. She absorbed this without moving. What do you need from me? She said. At present, nothing. He looked at the record. Tell me how the first one came to you. She told him. The garden, the warmth against her knee in the dark, the way it had settled without invitation and stayed until she finished her work. He was quiet for a long time after she finished. "You did not try to send it away," he said. "No? Why not?" She thought about this carefully. "It seemed impolite," she said finally. "It had come on its own authority. Whatever that authority was, I did not think I was in a position to challenge it." Something moved in his face, the shadow of expression, a warmth behind the glass that was there and then, carefully, deliberately, was not. "You may go," he said. She rose, picked up her work basket, walked to the door. "Signa!" She stopped. "The woman in this record," he said. "I will find her name." A pause. "Yes," she said. "I think you should." She walked out of the library into the cold corridor and stood for a moment in the dark, with her work basket and her wool coat and the heat of the firelit room still fading from her skin. She could hear, very faintly, the sound of the wolves in the outer grounds. A low sound, not quite howling, the sound of animals ranging in the dark. She walked back to the lower quarters. She lay awake for a long time, and she could not have said exactly why. She found the gray wolf favoring its right forepaw 3 mornings after the library meeting. It had come to her in the east storage passage, the way it always came, simply appearing at the passage entrance with the patient arrival of something that knows where it is going. She had been restacking the preserved root stores that had shifted in the night cold, and she noticed the change in the wolf's gait the moment it crossed the threshold. Not a limp exactly. Wolves were too careful for limps. But a fractional compensation in each step, the body redistributing weight with the subtle economy of something that had been doing this long enough to have made it a habit. She set down the turnip she was holding. "Come here," she said quietly. The wolf came. It stood before her with the cooperative gravity of an animal that has decided something is necessary, even if it cannot explain why. She crouched. She held out her hand, palm down, and let the wolf lower its muzzle to her fingers, not asking for its paw yet, just establishing the fact of contact first, the way the kennel master at her old estate had taught her before his eyes had gotten too bad for close work. Never rush an animal to the thing it needs. Let it arrive at its own necessity. The wolf's nose was cold and very large against her fingers. She worked her way carefully from its shoulder down its leg, her fingertips pressing lightly along the tendons, feeling for heat, for the particular held quality of an injury not yet 2 days old. The wolf stood perfectly still. When she reached the paw and turned it gently upward, she found the small wound immediately. A cut between the 2nd and 3rd digit, shallow but ill-placed, worked open by 3 days of ground travel. Already showing the pale edge of early cold, she reached into her work basket. She always carried supplies. This, too, was a habit that had never been assigned to her. She had simply begun bringing what she thought might be needed, and what she thought might be needed had, often enough, turned out to be needed, that the habit had persisted. Yarrow, a strip of linen, the small pot of rendered fat mixed with pine resin that worked better than anything she had found for cold ground wounds. She cleaned the cut with the care of someone who understood that thoroughness at the beginning prevented all the problems after. The wolf made no sound. It stood with the absolute stillness of an animal that has decided to be still, which was not the same thing as training. It was choice, and she knew the difference. When she was ready to wrap it, the wolf lowered its enormous head and pressed it against her shoulder. She went still. The weight of it was considerable. The warmth was immediate. She could feel the wolf's breathing against her neck, slow, even, the trusting depth of an animal that has committed to something. She wrapped the paw. She was tying off the linen strip when she became aware, not from sound, but from the particular change in the quality of air, the specific density of a specific attention, that someone was standing at the passage entrance. She did not look up immediately. She finished the knot first. Then she looked. Rorik stood at the entrance to the passage. He was not in his outdoor coat. He had come from inside, which meant he had followed the wolf's direction rather than come deliberately for her, which meant that the gray wolf had gone to him first and led him here. She understood this in the space of a moment, and then understood what it meant, that the wolf had come to him for the first time in years and had brought him to her. And she held that understanding quietly and said nothing about it. He was looking at the wolf's wrapped paw, then he was looking at her. The passage was narrow. The lamp she had set on the shelf gave yellow light that turned everything amber and close. He stepped in from the entrance and the passage became narrower still. Not small, he was not crowding her, but reduced. The distance between them became a thing with weight and temperature. "May I?" He gestured at the wolf's paw. "Yes." He crouched beside her. They were very close. She could feel the warmth coming off him. He ran hot the way all alphas ran. But it was more than that, she thought. More than biology. It was the specific warmth of someone who has been out in the cold for a long time and has not yet lost the cold from their skin, but is generating heat from inside with the steady efficiency of a banked fire. He examined the wolf's paw with careful hands. His hands were large and showed the use of them, calloused at the base of the fingers, scarred at the knuckle on his right hand, in the way she had seen in men who had held swords since adolescence. He touched the edge of the bandage, testing the tension, not undoing her work, but checking it. And she watched his profile and thought, he knows what he is looking at. "Where did you learn this?" he said without looking up. "The kennel master at Brant's estate." His eyes failed him in his last years. "I helped where I could." "And the resin paste?" "Something the healers used on horses in hard winters. I adjusted the proportions." He looked up. They were close enough that the adjustment in his posture brought his shoulder fractionally toward hers. Not touching, but close enough that she could feel the displacement in the air. His eyes in the lamplight were not gray. They were darker. The particular dark of a deep winter sky in the hour before dawn, when the color is so absent it becomes its own presence. "The wolf came to me this morning," he said. "For the first time in 3 years. His voice was lower in the narrow passage than it had been in the library. "It walked to my chamber door and stood there until I followed." "I know," she said. He looked at her. "I guessed," she said. "From the fact that you came from inside." A pause that was neither awkward nor comfortable, but something else. Inhabited. As if both of them were being careful with the thing they could feel, but had not yet named. "You observe carefully," he said. "It is useful," she said. "When you are in a position where most people are not looking at you, you learn to look at everything else." He was quiet for a moment. The wolf between them exhaled, a deep and utterly content sound, its wrapped paw resting against the cold stone floor, its head still leaning against Signa's shoulder. "Does it hurt it?" he asked. "The wrapping?" "Not if it's done correctly. The tension wants to be firm enough to hold, but not so tight it pulls." "Like..." She stopped. "Like what?" She shook her head slightly. "I was going to say, like an argument, firm enough to be true, but not so tight it cannot move." He looked at her with the quality of attention she was beginning to understand was not casual. Had perhaps never been casual. Had been this precise and this concentrated since the first moment he stood in the storeroom doorway. It was not the attention of a king assessing a situation. It was the attention of a person who had found something interesting and could not quite stop looking. "You use odd comparisons," he said, not critical. "Almost." "I know," she said. "Occupational habit. When you spend years alone with work, your thoughts make their own company." He said nothing to this for a moment. Then, quietly, "Yes, I know something of that." She looked at him. He was still looking at the wolf, and in profile she could see what he would not have shown her face on. The brief, unmanaged expression of a man who has said something true without intending to and is not yet sure how he feels about it. She did not push it. She reached into her work basket and produced a second strip of linen and set it beside the first. "A spare," she said, "in case it works it loose in the night." He picked it up. His fingers were warm. She felt it in the brief, entirely accidental brush of cold against warm as the linen passed between them, a contact so small it barely registered. Except that it did register, and she was aware of it the way she was aware of the lamp running low. Quietly, in her peripheral sense of how things were. She stood. Her knee ached from crouching. He stood a half-second after, and in the narrow passage the movement brought them into the specific close arrangement of two people in a space not designed for two people. And for one moment, no longer than a breath, neither of them moved. She could have counted his heartbeats in the silence. She thought she could. She thought hers was doing something irregular. She stepped back. "Thank you," he said. He said it the way he seemed to say all things, precisely, as if the word had been examined before it was offered. But there was something underneath the precision, a quality she could not name, like a stone with a fire inside it. "The wolf knew it needed help," she said. "I was simply the nearest person it trusted." "No," he said. "You were the person it chose." She left the passage before she could say something unwise. The cold of the corridor outside was a relief against her face, and she stood in it for a moment with her work basket and her careful composure, and the warmth still moving under her skin from the narrow passage and the lamplight and the weight of a wolf against her shoulder. She breathed. She went to find the next task that needed doing. Lady Ingrid had noticed the library meeting by morning. She was too precise an administrator not to, and too experienced to address it directly. Instead, she arranged the next day's work rotations with the surgical skill of a woman who understood that distance was management. Signa found herself assigned to the outermost reaches of the keep's operations, the outer passage repairs, the salting cellars, the linen storage at the far end of the east wing. Legitimate work, real work, work that kept her as far from the library and the main hall as the architecture allowed. Signa worked through all of it without comment. The wolves found her anyway. On the second day she was in the outer passage doing stone repairs. The mortar in the north-facing wall had cracked through 2 winters of freeze and thaw, another task that had belonged to no one and therefore to her, when she heard the particular soft percussion of large paws on flagstone behind her. 2 wolves. She did not turn. She made room for them between the scaffolding and the wall, and they settled against her legs and slept. On the third day, she was on her knees in the outer passage with the mortar and the careful press of work that would not hold if rushed, when she felt the change in the air. She turned. Rorik stood at the passage entrance. He was in his indoor clothes, no riding coat, no outer gear, which meant he had come from inside the keep, following the wolves' direction through the corridors rather than crossing the outer grounds. He looked at the wolves. He looked at the stone repair. He looked at her. He walked the length of the passage and crouched beside her on the stone. He did not speak immediately. She kept working. The mortar needed the pressure of continuous attention or it settled wrong. "I went to the regional archive at Carveth," he said finally. He said it as though he was continuing a conversation they had not yet started, but which had been running underneath everything else. "By correspondence. The woman in Orvin's entry, the record keeper I use for the historical logs. She was transferred from this keep in the spring following the entry. There is a petition in the archive." Sina set down her tool. "The petition requested her removal," he continued, "on the grounds that her influence over the estate wolves constituted an unpredictable variable in the keep's management. It was approved. The administrator who filed it was appointed to a regional council position the following year." The silence between them had a texture. She could feel it. "The woman's name in the archive," he said, "is listed only as her classification." "That is the usual practice," she said. "Yes, it is." He looked at the stonework. He looked at the mortar, still wet in its joint. "This repair," he said. 3 winters of damage at minimum. No one was assigned to it. It needed doing. He was quiet again. She picked up her tool and continued. "The council members at Carveth who have been building the case against this keep," he said. "One of them was on the keep's administrative board in the period following the entry in Orvin's record. He is the oldest of the 3. He said it carefully, precisely, with the deliberateness of a man who was choosing his precision as a gift. I do not believe in coincidence as a general operating principle." She turned and looked at him directly. "What do you believe in?" she said. He held her gaze. in the cold passage, with the gray light coming through the narrow high window and the wolves sleeping between them, he looked less like a king than she had seen him yet. He looked like a man crouching on cold stone beside someone else who was also crouching on cold stone, which was a more democratic arrangement than either of them had planned. "Evidence," he said, "and in what the wolves know that I have not yet figured out." He stood. He did not move toward the door immediately. "There are 11 days before I leave for Carveth," he said. "I need this keep's complete records for the past 3 years, not the administrative summaries, the working records, rotation logs, supply accounts, the actual numbers." She looked at the mortar joint. She set her tool down in the mortar bucket. "I can find what you need. I was told you kept the records when the record keeper was unwell." 8 weeks last winter, yes." He nodded. He moved to the passage entrance. Then, "Signa." She stilled. He said her name the way she had noticed him saying it, with a particular quality of care, as if he was still slightly uncertain of his permission to use it, as if a name could be borrowed. "This keep runs on people who do the work that falls to no one," he said. "I am aware that I have not been seeing it." "You are seeing it now," she said. He looked at her across the length of the cold passage. His eyes in the gray winter light were very dark. "Yes," he said, "I am." He walked out into the white morning. They worked in the library for 7 days. She brought the records each morning, not the summary volumes that appeared in the formal correspondence, but the actual working logs, the ones that showed what the keep genuinely ran on, the real numbers behind the presented numbers. She knew where everything was, not because she had been assigned to know, but because 4 years of being the person who did what needed doing had given her a complete map of Ironholt's actual operations, the way a body knows the shape of its own rooms. He worked through the documents with the meticulous patience of a man preparing an argument he intended to be unassailable. He had been doing this, she came to understand, since he was 20, since the line of authority had passed to him, at an age when most men were still learning what authority felt like. He had spent a decade watching the council test every edge of his position, and he had learned to answer institutional weapons with institutional standards. He was, she thought, watching him across the library table on the 3rd morning, a man who had been alone in his authority for a very long time. Not lonely necessarily, or not only lonely. Alone in the particular way of people for whom everyone around them has a stake in the outcome, which is a different kind of alone. On the 4th morning, he looked up from the supply account she had placed in front of him and said, "You knew about the petition, the pattern of it, before I found the archive record." "Not the specific document," she said, "but the pattern, yes." "How long?" "You learn the shape of it when you are in the category it is used against. You learn to recognize when a process that appears neutral is being directed." She paused. "I stayed because there was nowhere specifically safer, and because the work here is real. What I do at Ironholt has effects. I am not sentimental about it, but I am not indifferent to it either." He looked at her for a moment. "Yes," he said. "It does have effects." She reached across and turned the next document toward him without looking at him. And he read it. And they worked in the warm library while the wolf slept at her feet and the fire burned down. And outside the narrow windows the snow fell without urgency, the way January snow fell in the north, patient, committed, entirely without drama. On the 6th day before his departure, Lady Ingrid filed a formal notation. The house scribe delivered it to Signa in the stairwell with the expression of a person conveying something they wished they did not have to convey. The notation characterized the wolves' behavior as a disruption to standard keep operations. It recommended that the Omega domestic identified as the source of the disruption be transferred to the Eastern rotation before the next quarter review. It cited 3 administrative precedents. The 3rd precedent was the petition from 100 years ago. Sign read it in the stairwell, read it a second time, folded it precisely along its original crease, put it in her work basket under the record volume she was already carrying, set it on the library table in front of the Alpha King without comment. He read it once, then again. then set it flat on the table and looked at it with the particular stillness of a man who has encountered confirmation of something he had hoped not to find. "She found the Carveth record," he said. "She has always been thorough," Sina said. "The council member you mentioned, the oldest one, he would have shown her the precedent. They have been in correspondence." "Yes." He looked at the notation. "She is not acting from malice." "No, she is acting from institutional certainty, pointed in a direction by someone who understood how to use it." A pause. "She has worked within the category system her entire career. She believes she is doing her job correctly. Those are different problems from malice." He looked at her. Something moved in his expression. Not the shadow of warmth she had caught before, but something more direct. Something that had decided in this moment to be more direct. "You are characterizing the woman who filed a transfer petition against you with considerable clarity," he said. "I am characterizing her accurately. I find accuracy more useful." She paused. "I have also been keeping duplicate records." He went very still. "Of the keep's accounts," she said. "The working records and the administrative summaries have not matched for 18 months. When records do not match, it is usually because someone has a reason for the discrepancy. I find it practical to know what the real numbers are." She reached into her work basket and set a second set of documents on the table beside Lady Ingrid's notation. The silence was long. 18 months, he said. "Yes, and no one knew." "No one asks what is in the work basket of a lower rotation domestic," she said. "That is rather the point of the category." He looked at the documents. He looked at her. Something crossed his face. Not quite the expression of a man encountering the unexpected. The expression of a man who has been looking for something a long time without knowing it, who has just found it in the last place anyone would have thought to look. "If I present these at Carveth," he said slowly, "alongside the correspondence between the council member and Lady Ingrid, which the keep's mail records will provide once I am looking for it, the institutional case is complete." "Yes," she said. "The notation becomes evidence of collusion rather than administration." "Yes." He was quiet. Outside, the wolves moved in the estate grounds in the early dusk, their dark shapes crossing the snow with the patient deliberateness of animals who have made their decision and are simply continuing to live it. "You should be in a named position," he said. She looked at him. "With a specific designation, a direct reporting line, a salary that corresponds to what you actually do." He said it with the careful precision she had come to understand was not distance, but its opposite. Precision was how he showed that something mattered to him. "I am aware that this should have been addressed before this conversation." "The work was the same," she said, "named or not." "Yes," he said, "but you were not." She looked at him then, directly, with the quality of attention she gave the wolves, the steady, unhurried gaze of someone who is not performing composure but actually has it. "I will stay," she said, "if the position is what I believe it to be." "What do you believe it to be?" "A state records manager, access to both working and administrative archives, no rotation assignment, a direct reporting line to you when you are in residence." "Yes, that is precisely what it is." She nodded. She picked up her work basket. She walked to the door. "Signa." She stopped, did not turn quite, waited. "When I return from Carveth," he said, "I intend to ask you something that has nothing to do with the records." She was still for a moment. The fire made its small sounds. Outside, a wolf called once. Not a howl, something quieter. The particular sound of an animal that knows where everything it cares about is located. "I will be here," she said. She left. He was to leave at first light. She found the library empty at the supper hour, which surprised her. She had come to return the last set of documents and had expected to find him already packing or reviewing final correspondence or doing any of the dozen things that stood between a king and his departure. The gray wolf was there, asleep under the table in its usual position, its enormous, slow-breathing bulk occupying the space beside her chair, as if the chair had been placed for that purpose. She set the documents on the table. She was turning to leave when he came through the door behind her, in his riding coat, travel-worn already, with snow still in his hair from the outer grounds. He stopped when he saw her. "I was returning the records," she said. "I know." He came further into the room. "I saw the light under the door." A pause. The fire was low, the lamps trimmed for economy, the kind of light that makes rooms feel smaller and more honest. "Carveth will take 9 days," he said. It was not informational. They both knew the timeline. "Yes," she said. He was looking at her in the way he had looked at her in the narrow passage, not measuring, not assessing, but simply looking, with the full weight of his attention, the way he looked at things that mattered to him. "The duplicate records," he said. "You kept them for 18 months, alone, in a work basket, not knowing whether anyone would ever look." "I kept them because it was the correct thing to do." "Yes, I know that." He paused. "I'm saying it anyway." She looked at the fire. "You should sleep before the ride," she said. "Probably." He did not move to leave. "Signa." She looked at him. "The question I intend to ask when I return," he said. "I want you to know, it is not about the wolves. It is not about what they have chosen or what the old record says. I have watched you work. I know what it is worth. I know what you are worth." He said it carefully. Each word settled into its place. "The wolves were faster than I was in understanding that. That is my failure, not a qualification for you." She held his gaze. "Go to Carveth," she said softly. "Yes." "Come back." Something happened in his face, that warmth behind the glass, and this time the glass thinned. Not gone, but thinned. She could see through it to the fire behind. "Yes," he said, "that is the intention." The gray wolf, under the table, made its contented sound. The small domestic sound of an animal settled exactly where it wants to be. Neither of them looked away for a moment longer than was necessary. Then he left. She stayed in the library until the fire went out, not working, not reading, simply sitting in her chair with the wolf's warmth against her feet and the cold dark pressing at the windows. And she thought about 9 days and about the difference between a circumstance and a decision. She was, she realized, beginning to hope. She learned things in those 9 days that she had not known she needed to learn. She learned that the keep was louder in his absence. Not with actual noise. The household moved through its routines with the same efficient quiet, but with the specific loudness of a space that had recently contained something and now did not. She noticed it in the library, where the second chair sat empty and the lamps were trimmed to her work requirements only. She noticed it in the outer grounds, where the wolves ranged with a restless energy she had not seen before, pacing longer circuits than usual, returning to the keep's walls with the particular behavior of animals waiting for a thing they know will come. She worked. She organized the records into the structure she had been planning since she understood the position was real. She reconciled the duplicate accounts against the master ledger so that when he returned, the numbers would be ready. Not because he had asked, but because the work needed doing and she was the person to do it. Lady Ingrid learned her name on the 6th day. It happened simply, in the corridor, when Lady Ingrid was handing a routing document to the house scribe and turned to find Signa walking past and said, without preparation, "Signa, a moment. Not Omega Domestic. Not you. Not the particular deliberate blindness that categories require." Signa had stopped. They had stood in the corridor for a brief, strange moment. Two women who had been in the same institutional arrangement for 4 years and were, both of them, recalibrating. "The records position," Lady Ingrid said. "I will ensure the administrative designation is filed before the quarter review." "Thank you, my lady." A pause. "The wolves' welfare is also part of the estate's operating record," Lady Ingrid said carefully. "If you have observations about their condition, they should be documented." It was not an apology. Lady Ingrid was not a woman who apologized. She was an administrator, and she updated her categories when the category stopped working, which was its own form of acknowledgement. "Yes, my lady," Signa said. "I will document them." She walked away down the corridor and she thought, the gray wolf was right. Things can change. They simply require patience and the willingness to keep doing the work while you wait. The 9th day came. She was in the library when she heard the horses. She did not go to the gate. The household assembled in the courtyard. She could hear the gathering, the voices, Lady Ingrid's carrying tones arranging the reception with her usual precision. Sina stayed at the library table. She lit the lamps. She arranged the documents in the order she wanted them. The Carveth accounts ready for reconciliation, the duplicate records marked for comparison, the notation from Lady Ingrid beside the formal letters from the council, each piece exactly where it would be most useful. She built the fire higher than she needed for herself. She sat down. The gray wolf was asleep under the table. She was working through a column of figures, finishing the sentence the way she always did before she stopped, when she heard his footstep in the corridor. She knew it now. The specific weight and rhythm of it, unhurried, slightly heavier on the right side from an old riding injury she had noticed and never mentioned. He appeared in the doorway. He was travel-marked, still in his coat, still carrying the cold of the road, his face tightened by 9 days of hard work and north wind and the particular strain of coming back from a battle won with documents rather than swords. She looked up. "The motion was withdrawn," she said. Something eased in him. Not dramatically. The way a door that has been held against the wind settles when the wind drops. On the 4th day, the council member took an administrative leave on the 6th. Lady Ingrid has received formal communication from the Oversight Board. "I know," she said. "Lady Ingrid told me this morning. The courier arrived at dawn." He looked at her for a moment. Then, very slightly, the corner of his mouth moved. The ghost expression she had been cataloging for weeks. The one that appeared when he had relaxed past the point of management. "You already knew," he said. "I was waiting to hear how you would say it." He came into the library. He sat down, not across the table, in the other chair, the way he had been sitting for the past 7 days of their work together. He reached into his coat and produced a folded letter and set it on the table. "Lady Ingrid asked me to give you this," he said. "She wrote it in Carveth after the council session." He paused. "She asked about you, by name." Sina looked at the letter. She picked it up, held it for a moment without opening it. "The position," she said. "It stands as discussed." "Yes." He looked at her directly. He had the quality of stillness of a man in the moment before a decision. Not the hesitation of uncertainty, but the stillness of someone who has made the decision and is choosing the words with care. "I said when I returned I would ask you something that was not about the records." The gray wolf's tail moved once under the table. "Yes," she said. "You did." "I am asking," he said, "if you will consider allowing me to know you, not as the king who employs you, as a person who has been paying attention, belatedly, I know, and finds that having started, I do not want to stop." A pause. "I have no formal interest in rank," she said. "I know. Or in wolves as a recommendation, however well-intentioned. I know that too." He looked at her steadily. "I am not asking you because of them. I am asking because of what I have seen you do. The work, the records, the mortar in the cold passage, the way you read the Wolf's Gate, the way you said you were looking now in a tone that was neither complaint nor forgiveness, but simply accuracy." He paused. "I am asking because I would like, for the first time in some years, to have a person in this keep who says the accurate thing to me rather than the managed thing." She was quiet. The fire made its small sounds. Outside, she could hear the wolves in the courtyard, the joyful, wide-ranging movement of animals whose particular fixed point had returned. "Ask me again," she said, "in the spring, when the keep is not emerging from a crisis and you have had time to know whether this is a decision or a circumstance." He looked at her. Yes, he said. That is fair. I know it is, she said. She picked up her pen. The Carveth accounts need to be reconciled before the quarter closes. I have been waiting 9 days for you to bring me the council's figures. He looked at her for a moment. That expression again. The one she was beginning to think of as his actual face, underneath all the versions of the face that authority required. Then he reached into his coat and produced the Carveth account documents and set them on the table between them. The gray wolf's tail moved again, slow and satisfied. They worked through the evening in the warm library while the snow fell steadily outside and the estate settled around them into quiet, and neither of them spoke about the spring, and both of them were waiting for it. It came the way it always came to the north, not with warmth, but with light. An extra half hour of gray brightness each day, the kind that was not beautiful but was better than nothing, the kind that made you understand why people throughout all of time had worshipped the sun. The ice broke on the stream at the keep's east edge in the 3rd week of the 3rd month. The snow retreated from the inner courtyard, and the wolves began ranging wider on their morning circuits, drunk on the new distance, their silver-gray shapes moving through the bare branch forest edge like water finding its natural course. Signa had been in the named position for 4 months. The difference was smaller than she had expected in the daily texture of the work. The records were the same records. The estate ran on the same operations. The work that had needed doing still needed doing, and she did it. The difference was in how it landed. In Lady Ingrid using her name with the careful correctness of someone who had updated a category and was committed to the update. In the house scribe bringing the morning correspondence with a punctuality that was its own form of apology. In the wolves ranging through the keep's grounds with the settled confidence of animals that have been proven correct in their choices. He told her things in the evenings. Not conversation exactly, more like report, delivered without obvious expectation of response. The way someone accustomed to carrying information alone begins to set it down somewhere. The difficulty with the Northern Supply Line, his opinion of the Council's proposed revision of the Estate Inheritance Code, which he considered procedurally sound but historically illiterate. The particular quality of irritation produced by the newest council member, competent but constitutionally unable to be brief. She listened. Sometimes she said something. He absorbed it with the quality of a man learning that he did not need to manage the person offering him a considered opinion. They worked their morning correspondence at the same table, and the silence between the working hours was the silence of 2 people who had stopped managing the distance. He asked her to walk with him on a morning when the light was clear. She went. They took the east track, where the ground was still hard under the thinning snow, where the wolves ranged ahead and circled back with the easy energy of animals in good air. She had her coat, her work basket over her arm from habit, her repaired boots keeping the cold out for the first time in years. They walked in silence for a while, the kind of silence that did not need filling. Then he stopped. She stopped beside him. He turned to look at her. The east light, the clear, cold light of a spring morning in the north, lit his face from the side, and she saw him the way she had come to see him over these months. Not the image of authority she had been handed by the estate's fear, but the actual man. Younger than his position made him seem, more capable than anyone knew, and more tired for it. A man who had been carrying his own weight alone for a long time, and had recently, cautiously, begun to consider that he did not have to. I have been asking myself, he said, whether what I spoke of in the autumn was a decision or a circumstance, as you asked me to. She waited. It is a decision. He paused. It has been a decision for longer than I was willing to acknowledge. That is worth saying, because the time I spent not acknowledging it is time I owe you the honesty of. She looked at him for a moment. You are very careful with words, she said. I am trying to be precise. I know, she said. That is what I meant. You use precision when something matters to you. A pause. Yes, he said, I do. She looked out at the wolves in the morning light. The gray one with the frost-pale fur moving through the bare branch edge of the keep's forest. The black one sitting on a ridge of frozen earth, watching them both with its patient, uncategorizable attention. "Ask me," she said. He asked her. She said yes. It was not a dramatic yes. It was not performed or announced to the open grounds, or the circling wolves, or the cold spring sky. It was the yes of a person who had thought carefully and arrived at a conclusion that, once arrived at, needed no further deliberation. She turned back to the track and continued walking. After a moment, he fell into step beside her. The gray wolf circled back from the forest edge and walked between them, enormous and unhurried, its wrapped paw long since healed, its amber eyes forward on the track. In the late spring, when the keep's grounds had come out from under the snow and the account books had been reconciled to everyone's satisfaction and the Carveth Council had closed its review without further action, the library had changed in the way rooms change when they are used daily by people who have found their way to ease with each other. There were 2 chairs at the table now, both with cushions, because she had pointed out one morning that the library chairs were designed for people who sat in them for an hour, and he had been sitting in them for 6. He had agreed without comment, and the cushions had appeared by the following morning, which told her something about the way he dealt with observations that were accurate. The gray wolf slept under the table. The black one had occupied the space near the fireplace with such regularity that the housekeeping staff had stopped moving it and had begun cleaning around it instead. She had the estate records in the order she wanted them. One morning, early in the first warm week, she came into the library to find him standing at the window with a document in his hand and the gray wolf sitting at his feet. He turned when she entered and said her name, Signa, precise and unhurried, and the wolf's tail moved across the floor in its slow, contented arc, and the windows were open to the first warm morning, and the accounts were in order on the table. He held the document out. She took it. It was the Carveth record. The one with the old petition, the woman who had been transferred, whose name was not in the subsequent rolls. "I found her," he said. "Her name. It was in the receiving estate's records in the south. She remained there. She is in the rolls for another 32 years. She looked at the document. "Good," she said quietly. "I thought you would want to know." "Yes," she said. "I did." She set the document on the table. She sat down in her chair, the one with the cushion, in the warm library with the window open to the summer morning and the wolf settling back at her feet with the particular sigh of a very large animal that has found its exact correct location in the world. He sat down across from her. Outside, the pack moved through the keep's grounds in the morning light. The gray and the black and the others, ranging through the open spaces of Ironholt, with the unhurried confidence of animals that have made their choice and been proven right in it. The ledger was open on the table. She picked up her pen. Outside, the summer morning went on being itself, gold-gray and northern and full of the ordinary, extraordinary business of a world that keeps going, which is, when you are finally allowed to watch it without fear, a remarkable thing. The morning began. He was not easy to know. But then, the things worth knowing rarely are. They require patience and the willingness to return, which is not so different from what the wolves required. She had simply brought the same quality of attention to both. There is a kind of person the world learns not to see, not because they are invisible, but because seeing them would require the world to admit how much they have been carrying, quietly, without complaint, without recognition, without even the small dignity of being called by their name. Signa was that person. She did not ask to be chosen. She did not perform for the wolves, or arrange herself for the king's attention, or wait to be rescued. She simply did the work that needed doing, in the cold, in the dark, in the corridors no one else walked down. And yet, something ancient and unhurried saw her anyway. The wolves knew before the king did. The wolves always know. What this story asks, underneath all the frost and firelight and careful silences, is a question we rarely stop to sit with. How many people in your life are doing everything right, holding everything together, and have never once heard their own name said like it matters? The greatest love stories are not always the loudest. Sometimes they begin with a wolf lying down beside someone the world had decided did not count. And sometimes being truly seen, finally, completely, by someone who chose to look, is the only ending worth waiting for. If something in this story stayed with you, a moment, a line, a feeling you couldn't quite name, drop it in the comments below. I read every single one, and honestly, your words are what keep these stories coming. If you want to be here for the next one, subscribe and hit the bell. It is the simplest way to make sure we find each other again. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. That means more than you know.